But I'm not going to discourage people from showing up and protesting. I think that's one of the best ways in the United States to get your message across. Again, peacefully.
I think it's just going to be one more barrier for us to see the law enforced as it should be in an orderly way.
It's Governor J.B. Pritzker being asked yesterday about the ongoing court battles over use of force and immigration enforcement. And he says that he's still encouraging protests despite federal officers saying they need protection from protests that turn violent. All while you've got a bill that's on the governor's desk that essentially will expand the state's migrant sanctuary policies. It is Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Wake up with us each and every weekday morning as we break things down for you here in the land of Lincoln. And the ongoing debate about immigration enforcement started years ago, really, when the Biden administration had the border open and a lot of people, estimated 10, 12, 14 million people, maybe 20 million people came across during the Biden administration. Now that the Trump administration's in, you've got enforcement of immigration law and flooding the zone, as the Trump officials say, in states like Illinois that are migrant sanctuary states. They have laws in place that don't allow for local and state police to cooperate with federal law enforcement when it comes to immigration. So the sanctuary laws, a barrier, and you've got court battles that we've tried to highlight, dealing with the states being sued by the federal government for its sanctuary policies, the state suing the federal government for excessive use of force, and the state suing the federal government for use of the guard. Three major lawsuits that are pending in federal courts, but you've got the prospect of more. But for years, this has been an ongoing debate about the non-citizens that are here, and we've heard that they are asylum seekers. Well, a conservative commentator in Chicago, James McCoy, he sounded off Monday, standing with Chicago Flips Red, that he doesn't see the asylum seekers.
But lies are so blatant now where you can walk outside your house and you can see the fact that the mayor, the governor, and even before President Biden were lying to you and telling you that these people coming over here were asylum seekers and they were not causing a problem. I actually went to the police stations and I asked them directly, are you asylum seekers? And they told me no. They told me that they were here for jobs. They were here for economic opportunities. This is not meaning an asylum seeker, okay? And yet all of the media was saying that these are asylum seekers who are here from war-torn countries and we have to have our hearts open to them and have the government that we pay taxes to subsidize everything, subsidize their hotels, subsidize their food, subsidize their clothes, as they're neglecting us and taxing us because they cannot sustain all of the subsidies that they've given people who do not legally have a right to be in this country.
So McCoy talking about the migrant situation, he says, is not asylum seekers, but you do hear that rhetoric from time to time. And, what constitutes non-citizen? It could be somebody here legally. It could be somebody here on a visa, a work permit. It could be somebody here illegally. It could be somebody that's got temporary protected status. It could be somebody that's seeking asylum. But the ongoing immigration efforts obviously are going to continue with the Trump administration. Governor J.B. Pritzker asked yesterday if instead of encouraging, quote, street fighters, why not just have the debate in court civilly? And Pritzker responded this way.
I've always advocated for peaceful, civil protest. Protest is fine. There are lots of ways to protest. Writing a letter is also a protest. Posting on one of the social media sites is protest. Showing up is protest. So I wouldn't discourage people from doing that. I do think, though, that a focus on changing policy in Washington and a broad endeavor to go after comprehensive immigration reform is what protesters, at least as things have diminished, the activities of ICE have diminished somewhat, that's a better focus of protest and of speaking out. But I'm not going to discourage people from showing up and protesting. I think that's one of the best ways in the United States to get your message across. again, peacefully.
So the governor reiterating peaceful protests, but that's not what federal officials have been facing. In court filings, they say that protests have turned violent. They even point to gangs that have put out hits for high-ranking federal officials in their arguments in court, saying that they need to be able to use force in protecting themselves, and the Trump administration also wanting to use the Guard to protect federal assets, property, and personnel from violence. And Pam Bondi yesterday told the president during the cabinet meeting that they continue to hold people accountable for going after federal officials.
Our civil division fighting sanctuary cities every single day. Our attorneys are working on terrorism, TDA, MS-13, Antifa, President Trump. We've charged more than 500 defendants with assault on federal officers thanks to your directive.
So again, the president hearing that from Pam Bondi, the U.S. Attorney General, yesterday. All of this while you've got a bill that's on the governor's desk to expand Illinois' migrant sanctuary policies. This bill started as a prisoner of war missing in action recognition day bill, passed the House way back in April unanimously. Republicans and Democrats passing that with 0 no votes. Then when it got to the Senate in October, months later, the measure was gutted and replaced with expansions of migrant sanctuary policies. And ultimately what it does is it holds hospitals, daycares, and universities to account for having policies dealing with enforcement of federal immigration law, and they could be held liable. It also opens up the possibility of private rights of action, or also known as lawsuits, against individuals that are alleged to have violated rights. State Representative Patrick Windhorst says that this law is really going to ultimately lead to more consternation between federal officials enforcing immigration law and state police.
Well, I view
police.
this, as I said, as an expansion of the Trust Act, which I think is having a detrimental impact on immigration enforcement in our state. Of course, that's what the purpose of the law is in a lot of respects, not only the bill we're talking about, but also the Trust Act. And it's going to make for some of the issues we're seeing in the city of Chicago, where law enforcement isn't able to work with federal law enforcement, isn't able to work with local law enforcement in that immigration enforcement measures, where it's creating scenes that are chaotic and it's causing issues for those who are enforcing federal law. And I think this will cause an expansion of that, where our local law enforcement officers aren't able to help the federal officers. One other provision of this bill that it talks about any person designed toward federal immigration enforcement, but our U.S. Constitution, of course, has a supremacy clause, which will mean that this provision, as it relates to federal law enforcement, will quite possibly, in fact, likely be unconstitutional, meaning that the only law enforcement officers who are going to be subject to penalties under this will be our local and state law enforcement, which I feel creates another problem, and we're subjecting our law enforcement to these possible penalties at a time we're having a difficulty in recruiting law enforcement to work in our state. Now, as it relates to how the Trump administration and state government will interact, I think it's just going to be one more barrier for us to see the law enforced as it should be in an orderly way, and will potentially create other arguments to be made that actions taken by the federal government beyond the normal law enforcement actions would be constitutional or allowed by federal law.
Where we go from here, we'll be watching each and every weekday morning here with Illinois in Focus Daily. So like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, get the headlines in your inbox, go to thecentersquare.com, click newsletter, and you'll see those headlines each and every morning. But you can wake up with us here for Illinois in Focus Daily, only with the Center Square.